The smell reached them before the farmhouse did. Wet hay, smoke, old wood soaked through by years of rain and winter. It drifted through the torn canvas, stretched above the truck bed, and settled over the men in silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The road beneath them had turned from pavement to gravel nearly an hour earlier, and now every bump rattled through their bones like loose machinery finally beginning to fail. Dieter lifted his head slightly. He could see his own breath. "Smells like home," he whispered. Carl snorted softly beside him. "Then your home was unfortunate?" A few of the others smiled despite themselves. Small smiles, careful ones. The kind men allowed themselves when they had forgotten how. The truck slowed. Outside, wind moved through leafless trees with a sound like distant whispers. The sky hung pale and low over the fields. Snow remained in dirty strips along the fence lines, stubborn against the early thaw. Somewhere nearby came the sudden, sharp cry of geese. Then the brakes sighed. A soldier pulled back the canvas. "Out!" No shouting, no rifle raised, just the word itself. That unsettled them more. The prisoners climbed down one by one into the cold mud. 6 men in worn grey coats, standing uncertainly in the middle of an American farmyard. Steam rose faintly from the earth where the weak morning sun touched puddles left behind by rain. Otto stepped down last, older than the others, broader in the shoulders, despite the weight war had stripped from him. His face carried the exhausted stillness of someone who had already seen too much and survived anyway. He looked first at the house, white paint peeling from the porch rails, smoke from the chimney, small boots near the front steps. Children lived here. That realization passed quietly among the prisoners. A civilian approached from the barn, pulling on thick work gloves. The farmer, tall, weathered, slow-moving in the deliberate way of men accustomed to hard winters and harder mornings. He studied them without expression. The American soldier beside him checked a clipboard. "Labor assignment," he said. "You work here until further notice. Behave yourselves, and there won't be problems." The farmer kept staring. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward and held out his hand. Nobody moved. The silence stretched awkwardly. Finally, Otto reached forward and shook it. The farmer's grip was rough and warm. "Walter," he said. "Otto." Walter nodded once. "You boys hungry?" The question landed strangely among them. Hungry was no longer a question. It was simply part of existing, like cold, like waiting. Nobody answered. Walter glanced toward the house. "My wife made soup." Carl frowned immediately. Suspicion sharpened his narrow face. "This is strange," he muttered in German. "Yes," Otto said quietly. "Very strange." Inside the farmhouse, the heat wrapped around them almost painfully. The kitchen smelled of onions, potatoes, broth simmering low on the stove, their faces flushed after weeks of transport camps and winter air. A woman stood by the counter, drying her hands on a towel. She looked tired more than frightened. Behind her sat 2 little girls, watching the prisoners openly from the table. One held a wooden horse missing a wheel. The other had flour on her cheek. Neither looked afraid. That disturbed the men most of all. The younger girl pointed at Otto immediately. "He's tall." Walter sighed softly. Emily. But the child kept staring. Then she held up the broken horse. Can you fix this? Carl let out a short, dry laugh before he could stop himself. The girl blinked. What's funny? No one answered. Walter's wife placed bowls onto the table. Sit, she said quietly. The prisoners obeyed almost mechanically. Steam drifted upward between them, potatoes, carrots, tiny pieces of meat floating in the broth. Dieter's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the spoon. He tried to hide it. Otto noticed Walter noticing, but the farmer pretended not to. That small act carried its own kind of mercy. For several minutes, only the sound of spoons filled the kitchen. The old clock above the sink ticked steadily. Wind brushed softly against the windows. Then Carl finally spoke. Why are we here? Walter leaned back slightly. Need help on the farm. There are Americans. Most are overseas, Walter replied, or buried. Silence settled over the room. Even the children stopped moving. War sat down quietly at every table eventually. That evening, the prisoners were shown the barn where they would sleep. Clean straw, folded blankets, a small stove already burning in the corner. Again, the men exchanged uncertain looks. This makes no sense, Carl whispered. Cruelty made sense. Kindness did not. That night, snow tapped softly against the barn roof, while the men lay awake, staring into darkness. Dieter spoke first. Do you think they know? Nobody asked what he meant. Otto stared upward at the rafters. People know many things during war, he murmured. Usually not the correct things. Carl turned toward him. You trust them already? No. Then why shake his hand? Otto thought for a long moment, because the warmth of that handshake still lingered in his palm like an accusation. Because he offered it, he said quietly. Outside, somewhere beyond the barn walls, a child laughed. Small, ordinary, alive. And none of the men slept easily after hearing it. The rhythm of the farm settled around them slowly, almost against their will. Morning frost, buckets of water, repairing fences bowed by winter storms, the smell of livestock and damp earth rising together beneath pale skies. Work before sunrise, soup after dark. Simple things. Forgotten things. The body remembered them faster than the mind did. Walter treated the prisoners less like enemies than exhausted men who happened to be standing nearby when the fences needed fixing. He rarely spoke more than necessary, instructions mostly, occasional dry observations about weather or broken machinery, but never insults, never threats. That alone felt unnatural. Emily followed Otto constantly whenever chores brought him near the house. Did Germany have snow? Yes. Do cows understand people? No. Are soldiers always serious? Otto looked down at her. Yes, he said solemnly. The child considered this carefully before nodding. That sounds terrible. Even Carl laughed at that. A small laugh, rusted from disuse. One evening, Otto repaired the girl's wooden horse beside the stove in the barn, while snow drifted outside the doors in soft white sheets. Dieter watched him carve the replacement wheel. You have children? The knife paused briefly in Otto's hands. A son, he said. Nothing more. Dieter understood enough not to ask further. When the horse rolled smoothly again, Otto stared at it for several seconds before setting it aside. Such a tiny thing, a toy repaired in a warm barn while the world still smoked from war. The absurdity of it hurt somehow. The next morning, Emily accepted the fixed horse with solemn amazement. "You fixed him." "He only needed a wheel." "My mamma says you were soldiers." The kitchen cooled slightly. Emily frowned. "You don't look like soldiers." Otto glanced toward the frosted windows. Sometimes he wasn't sure what soldiers looked like anymore either. "Sometimes soldiers stop being soldiers," he said. The child accepted this immediately. Children often understood things adults complicated. Weeks passed. Then the river began rising. At first nobody worried. Snow melted every spring. The fields flooded sometimes. But the rain did not stop. Grey water crept slowly across the lower pasture. Fence posts disappeared inch by inch beneath the current. Branches drifted past where grass had been yesterday. Walter watched the river constantly after that. By afternoon the current had turned fast and dark. "We move the animals now," he said. Everyone worked without pause. Mud swallowed their boots. Horses kicked nervously in the cold rain. Chickens screamed while being carried uphill toward the barn. The girls stood on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching silently. Rain hammered the roofs harder. Then came the scream, small, sharp, terrible precisely because it was small. Walter turned instantly. Emily stood near the flooded edge of the yard, crying and pointing. Her sister was gone. For one frozen heartbeat, nobody moved. Then everyone moved at once. The child appeared downstream briefly in the rushing water, a flash of red scarf against grey current. Walter ran forward, too far, too slow. Otto was already moving. Later he would barely remember the decision itself, only fragments. Freezing water, mud. The violence of the current striking his body sideways. The river swallowed him almost immediately. Cold everywhere, branches crashing past. Then the child again, crying, drifting. He caught the scarf once and lost it. The second time he grabbed hold properly. The current fought him viciously. For one terrible moment he felt both of them slipping beneath the water together. Then another pair of hands reached through the rain. Walter. Together they dragged the little girl toward shallow ground. Mud. Shouting. Coughing water. The world dissolved into broken pieces of sound and movement. When Otto finally opened his eyes fully, he lay wrapped in blankets on the farmhouse porch, while Walter's wife held the shaking child against her chest. Rain drummed heavily overhead. Walter sat nearby, completely soaked through, staring silently at Otto. Neither man spoke. Language suddenly felt too small. Emily approached slowly, clutching the repaired wooden horse. "You jumped in," she whispered. Otto looked toward the flooded fields where the fence lines had nearly vanished beneath the river. "Yes." "Why?" There it was, the question beneath every other question. Why mercy? Why kindness? Why save anyone after years spent watching people destroy each other so carefully? Otto opened his mouth. Nothing came. Walter answered instead without looking up. Because drowning children don't care about uniforms. Silence followed. Only rain, only wind. And somewhere deep inside Otto, something long frozen shifted painfully back toward life. After the flood, the farm changed in ways too quiet to name directly. The distance disappeared first. Walter no longer watched the prisoners from the corners of his eyes. The girls wandered freely into the barn, carrying cups of coffee too hot for their small hands. Even Carl softened eventually, though he seemed irritated by his own softness. One evening Sarah fell asleep against his arm while he repaired harness straps beside the stove. He froze completely, afraid to move, afraid perhaps of remembering himself too clearly. Otto pretended not to notice the careful way Carl adjusted the blanket over the child afterward. Outside, snow drifted slowly through the dark, winter returning again. At supper, Walter's wife began serving the prisoners before being asked. Extra potatoes appeared quietly in their bowls, fresh bread sometimes, butter when there was enough, tiny mercies, the kind capable of breaking a man faster than cruelty ever could. Because cruelty expected nothing from you except survival. Kindness demanded reflection. One night, Dieter stood outside the barn, smoking beside Otto, beneath a sky filled with pale stars. The farm lay silent around them, fences disappearing into darkness, smoke rising from the chimney in slow white ribbons. "I keep forgetting we're prisoners," Dieter admitted softly. Otto watched frost gather along the fence wire. "Yes. Is that dangerous?" The older man considered the question carefully. Far off in the house, one of the girls laughed in her sleep. The sound drifted faintly through an open window. "Maybe," Otto said. Dieter exhaled smoke into the cold. "When I first arrived here," he whispered, "I thought they were fools. And now? Now I think maybe they were braver than us." Otto said nothing, because there were too many kinds of bravery in the world, and war had confused most of them. Weeks later, military trucks finally returned. The war was ending everywhere now, camps emptying, prisoners reassigned, borders shifting like ice breaking apart in spring rivers. The men stood silently in the yard with their few belongings gathered at their feet. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the barn roof. Emily clung to Otto's coat. "You'll come back?" Walter's wife looked away immediately. Otto knelt carefully before the child. "I don't know. You can't stay?" He glanced toward Walter, toward the farmhouse, toward the fences they had repaired together beneath winter skies. A strange ache moved quietly through him, not belonging exactly, something sadder, the memory of belonging. Walter stepped forward then, and extended his hand again, exactly as he had the first morning. This time, Otto took it immediately. No hesitation, no confusion, just warmth, passing briefly between two exhausted men who had survived the same century in different ways. "You take care," Walter said. "You too." Carl climbed into the truck last. Before pulling himself fully inside, he looked back once toward the house, toward Sarah sleeping against the window glass, toward Emily holding the repaired wooden horse against her chest, toward the thin line of smoke rising into the pale morning sky. Then he shook his head quietly to himself. "What?" Dieter asked. Carl stared out across the frozen fields. "I spent 4 years thinking humanity was something weak men invented," he murmured. The truck engine growled alive beneath them. Carl kept watching the farmhouse grow smaller behind drifting snow. "But maybe," he said softly, "it's the only thing that survives us." The farm disappeared slowly beyond the trees. Still. Years later, Otto would remember almost nothing about the roads afterward. Not the camps, not the paperwork, not even the long journey home to a country that no longer resembled the one he had left. But he remembered the smell of soup in that warm kitchen, the sound of children laughing upstairs while snow fell outside, a farmer's rough hand offered without hatred, and a small broken horse rolling straight again across old wooden floorboards. Memory was strange that way. The world believed history lived inside battles and treaties and speeches shouted from balconies. But often history survived somewhere much quieter, in kitchens, in barns, in the brief warmth between strangers taught to fear each other, in the simple, unbearable discovery that even after war, people remained human. And perhaps that was why such moments lingered so painfully, because they left no place for excuses afterward.